So what I'll be covering today is the requirements for making spot color measurements, creating a spot color library and adding colors, the process for creating spot color curves, choosing VLT or SCTV, and some of the other spot color features as we have time during the presentation, not necessarily in that order. Why do we need spot color curves? Well, one of the main things I'll be covering here today is the curves side of things. There's no more Pantone tint guides to guide people on their way. They were phased out at least 5 years ago now. Linear curves don't match visual requirements. Much is the same in the CMYK world for the solids there, but any spot color, if you just use a standard curve, you will not find that 50% looks like 50%. That's essentially what we're looking to try to alleviate here. So different hues and shades, so every different spot color that you come across actually requires a custom curve. You might imagine that you've got a solid which is quite a light color, maybe a light blue, similar to the one that says Bodoni in the top of the presentation screen, or you might have a really dark purple, similar to the one at the bottom of the graphic on the right-hand side. Those two colours would require a different curve shape in order to print the tints correctly. Substrate colour, that will affect the tint range. It's also essential for extended gamut CMYK orange, green, violet or orange, green printing processes. To have a good curve shape and a smooth tint ramp will definitely help if you are looking at this kind of extended gamut printing. Plus blending with other tints. So here we have a graphic just showing a typical linear curve, and if you can follow my cursor, you might see there's a fairly heavy line which denotes that essentially the curve kind of drops away about 75%, and we can't really see the light coloured graphic at the left-hand side of any of these labels. If after we've done a pressSIGN curve test with VLT, you'll see that the tint ramp is much more even, your 50% looks much more like 50%, and things like the blends in the left-hand side are much easier to see. So we get a much smoother visualization of the tint ramp and the gradient of the spot color. So, straight on to pressSIGN 9. Let me just start right at the start. I'm going to, hopefully you are a little aware of what pressSIGN looks like. This is not an introduction to pressSIGN. It's really a kind of, let me show you how some of the higher features of pressSIGN are used. So the pressSIGN interface, hopefully you'll know a little bit about it. I'm going to start this presentation just going into a new job setting. So when I set up a new job, I'll just put in a job name here. One of the important things is the actual target standard. Now the target standard, you might ask, why do you need the target standard to be any different? Well, target standards within them, if I go to the edit button, they have areas that govern the spot color scoring, as well as how we deal with the curves that are created. So if I go to tolerances, the first area that we see, hopefully you can see in my cursor, is a spot tick in that box. This means that if the job using that target standard has spot colors in it, then pressSIGN will score that job for spot colors as well as CMYK. So that's the first box in the LAB, the color dialog. Also in the density area, we have two tick boxes. One says spot color dot gain. This is essentially saying, do you want pressSIGN to calculate the spot color dot gain? And if you do, there's two ways that we can do it. One says is automatic, and that is the way that we use pressSIGN naturally with its own proprietary calculation software called VLT, Visual Linear Tinting. The other way you might have heard of is through ISO 20654, SCTV, SHMU. It comes under several different names, that you can use that methodology as well to calculate your tint ramp. And here we're saying we want to score the spot tints using the VLT. So we're going to get a score for the spot color tints as well. They are the critical things that allow us to get scoring in the system for pressSIGN and the job. I need to resave it. So that's the first thing. My target has spot color scoring built within it. The next thing that we do is we need to have a press that has an allocation of spot colors. So here I've got a target press which has got black, cyan, magenta, yellow in some of the units, but then I've got two other units that I could use to allocate spot colors. I can indeed say, well, I'm not using black. Just click on the unit and say, I'm going to allocate a spot color to that particular unit. And you can use up to 12 spot colors. For this demonstration, I've actually created a custom press, which just has 6 units, and they're each a spot color 1, 2, and all the way up to 6. The way we allocate a spot color to a job is pretty hidden, and this is the first thing that gets people confused. So what we need to do is we need to click on the spot color unit. It's called spot color 1, where I could allocate it to be any other spot color number. And here we have the ability to choose the spot color library. Now, pressSIGN has all of the Pantone libraries built in, and they're fully up to date. So I could very easily just click on Pantone Solid Coated and then choose a color from the coated library. I can type in a number if I wanted to, and it would populate that unit with that particular color. So that's one way that we can do it. I'm going to actually allocate the first color, and you'll see why, to 2077, which is a kind of a purple color. So I've got a purple allocation to that unit. The second unit color, I'm going to double click and add. I've got a custom spot color library here, and I'm going to show you how to add colors to that library. But I've got a custom library called a color called Red with Tints. And I'll click on that, and that's allocated that to the second unit. Now I have 2 other colors in my job that are not allocated and don't exist in any of the libraries. So I'll just start my video here. Hopefully you will be able to see me. Yes, you can. So hi. So I've got a set of color patches here with tint values. I've got the purple on this side and I've got the red allocated, but I need to create custom spot colors for this green and for this yellow. Okay, so that's what I'm going to now do. So the way I do that, I have an i1 plugged into my computer, so it's ready to measure. What I do is I click on the unit that I want to allocate the color to. And I can click on the custom spot color library. If I want to add a brand new library, I simply click on the plus button and put in a library name. And indeed here I could actually allocate the measurement standard that my spectrophotometer is set to. So you can do that there if you want to create a brand new spot color library. I'm going to just add to an existing custom library. So once I've got my custom library selected here, I add my color by clicking on the plus button here. And that brings up this new dialog box. And because I have an i1 Pro plugged in, it doesn't matter which spectrophotometer you have plugged in, pressSIGN will sense it and ask you to then measure the color patch that you want to add the color from. So I'm now going to simply click on the green patch, as we would call it, and pressSIGN populates that window. I name the color up here, green custom, and what you can see is that it's a 100% solid tint there. We have a lab value specified, and we have a density. And the reason we have a density value is because we've measured it spectrally with a spectrophotometer. So we've been able to calculate a tint ramp, a spectral ramp here. And we also see in the LAB value where the color kind of sits in that LAB range. I can simply click on OK. So that's my first color. I'm going to now, whilst I'm in the same area, add another color, which is my yellow. So I'll just place my spectrophotometer over the yellow, measure, and it comes up. Make sure that you name the color and click on OK. Fine. So what I can do now, whilst I'm on my spot color 3, I want to allocate that green to that color, to that patch. So I can actually type in green, and it says there's a PMS green, but I've got my green custom here. And if I allocate the yellow by double clicking spot color 4 and typing in yellow, amongst my yellows I have yellow custom, and click on there. So now my press is populated with 4 spot colors, and I've got 2 units that are empty. I can simply click on that and say there's no color in that box, and do the same here. And there is a benefit in the interface for that. pressSIGN doesn't try to show you 2 empty press units. The next thing that we need to look at is the color bar. So my color bar is completely blank here, and that's because the color bar that's currently selected is CMYK only. I need to have a color bar with spot colors in it. Creating a color bar is not what I'm going to cover in this show. There is videos online that already show how to create custom color bars. I have a color bar that's set for this, which I've called 1 to 650 tint and spot test. It's made up of essentially 100% of the first color, the purple, 50% of it, a paper patch. Then we have the red, but the red is a solid red, a 50% and a 75% red. And then I've got a green with 50 and a yellow with 50, and the others are blank because we don't have any spot colors in those units. I just want to show you and go back to this red color, and why have I got 3 of those? Well, let me show you what I wanted to highlight. If you have a measurement in your library, you can also have tint values of that color pre-specified, so that your printing system will try to match the tint values specified. So if you have tint patches in your color bar and you already have predefined tint values, then pressSIGN will provide a curve to match the curve that we see here. If you don't have tint values, then pressSIGN will use its VLT or SCTV calculation options in order to calculate the custom curve specific for that substrate and for that spot color. Okay. So that's what I just wanted to show you. You can actually have a spot color with tints pre-specified. So I'll now create the job. And the job is created, and interestingly, the one curve that we can see is the red one. And that's because pressSIGN knows that that color has already got a curve specified for it because it already has target tint values. If I said to pressSIGN, show me the green, then essentially it is a solid green line going all the way along 0, and our purported tolerance area is shown in green here. That's just as an example. So I can now measure the colours, and the way I have to measure it is through the single patches mode. I'm going to go to the colour bar and follow what it says here. Please measure the first colour, which is Pantone 2077. Then I'll do the 50% of that colour. Measure paper. Our custom red spot colour 2 are 50% of the spot colour. And what I'm going to do is, I've got a 75% tint patch, but I'm going to measure a different one just to show pressSIGN trying to correct this. So this patch is actually darker than 75% would normally be. Just another couple of patches to measure now. My special green with its tint patch. And remember, this tint patch we don't have a specified colour for. I'm simply measuring it because it appears in the colour bar. And this will allow pressSIGN to calculate a custom curve for us. In this window, I now click on Calculate, and pressSIGN measures and calculates the curves for us. If I go back to the summary screen, then we have a set of curves and a score. Let's just go for the individual curves first. Let me show you the green. So our green measurement has given us a score where we're not as good as we maybe should have been on the solid green. But the curve calculation is showing that it's actually below the line that we require. Let me just make this a bit bigger. There we are. So our green curve is below our target line. So pressSIGN's plate adjustment for that curve, if I click here, shows it lifting the line to normalize visually that color. That's true for all of the other curves except for red. If I go for red, let me just take away one of the curves. Our measured curve is the dotted line, and you can see that we kind of go underneath and then above the target value. So pressSIGN would say, okay, well, if that's as good as you can do with red, and we've got a 0% adjustment available in the red here, the curve that it will create, the curve adjustment will bring this target line down to match the target line for the tint values. So that's the very different curve that we see there. Pantone 2077 is very similar to the green. They'll both need to be lifted. And what we would do is simply export curves here and we'd select a standard that would allow us to export the curve values. So that's something you'll need to look at specifically for your RIP output. And we'd simply then be able to export the curves and go for the next print run with the correct curves applied to the spot color plates. So the process for creating custom spot color curves is to create a job. So we open up a new job, we allocated the spot color to the units. We made sure that we had a spot color bar, not only with a solid patch in it, but at least a single tint patch, and that might have been a 50%. Very normally, if you can only fit one tint value patch on, it would be 50%. But if you can do more, if you can put a 25 and a 75 in there, that will allow pressSIGN to calculate the curve requirement much better. So you then run the job with that color bar and you print as best you can to have a smaller color correction on these colors as you possibly can. So having a 19% or a 22% adjustment in the color is probably not ideal. We would probably be trying to follow what pressSIGN says here and decrease the density to better match the solid color before we then calculate the curves. Okay, then we export the curves and apply them to plates and then print using the same substrate and the same target standards. Okay, so I've already covered some things in here. Let me just clarify. We select a spot color here, we can choose a library right here, and we can add a color by clicking on the spot color with the plus button just here. That allowed me to measure a color. And if I just measure another color, let me just measure the green once more. That's fine. But there are other methods of adding colors. I can add tint values here by specifying a tint value and then measuring that tint value, and that would populate into the area here. So let me show you. I'll just measure 50%. And as soon as I do that, a warning comes up or a requirement comes up. It says paper patch missing. So if we are measuring tint values, then pressSIGN, in order to calculate the curve, which is blank here, requires you to measure the paper color as well. So I'm going to measure the paper color right now. I select 0 in my dot area, and now that has allowed pressSIGN to calculate a curve for me for that color. And here we see the paper color, the 50% tint and the solid tint. And we also then get a tint ramp of the colors that are specified. So this way we are actually prescribing what that green color should be. So if I call this green with tints, it won't get in the way of my other green where I had no tint values and I wanted pressSIGN to calculate it for me. The other method of adding colors to a color library is to browse and select a CXF, a TXT, or a CGATS file which contains a library. So you're able to export libraries from other systems and import them directly into pressSIGN using this browse button. The third method of adding a color would be to simply, I'll do it this way, I could simply type in a lab value here and click on add, and that will add the lab value into the measurement as well. That's the least best way of doing things because the lab value does not allow us to calculate a density for you. It's only when you measure with a spectrophotometer that we can calculate the density information. Thank you for watching. Please make sure you check out YouTube for some of the other pressSIGN features and tips videos.